Well, the education department is in the Trump administration's crosshairs. Let's get into it.
President Trump finalizing plans to gut the Department of Education. Sources tell ABC News the president now weighing an executive order to direct his education secretary to submit a proposal to dismantle the agency and call on Congress to eliminate it.
To my friends who are upset, I would say with respect, call somebody who cares. They better get used to this. It's USAID today. It's going to be Department of Education.
President Donald Trump is making good on one of his campaign promises, and that was to eliminate the Department of Education. Now, Politico reports that he intends to do so through an executive order. Obviously, there are going to be some obstacles in accomplishing this through an executive order, and I'll explain how in just a moment. But the EO isn't going to be signed until his education secretary nominee is confirmed. And that, of course, is Linda McMahon. So from what we know at the moment, Trump's plan to shutter the education department would come in a few different phases. So his executive order would direct the department to create a plan that would basically wind down the functions of this federal agency and its existing administrative authority. But the order was also expected to call for the agency to inventory a complex set of laws needed to delegate the department's powers to other agencies and then close the department. An acknowledgement that some of conservatives' biggest desires for change hinge on congressional approval. And this is where Trump is likely going to run into some issues with what he's trying to do here. Now, of course, DOGE is involved in this. A third anonymous source that spoke to Politico revealed that representatives from the Department of Government Efficiency were working at the Education Department headquarters on Monday of this week. They were seeking to access records at the agency. But if the Department of Government Efficiency is so worried about government waste, and there is government waste, I will concede that that's certainly true. It is a little strange, it's curious that they keep focusing on these various government agencies that receive a tiny, tiny sliver of resources from the federal government relative to what the Pentagon receives. And consider the fact that the Pentagon has failed every single audit. 7 audits in a row, they have failed every single one. They're now receiving close to $1 trillion a year. Okay, money allocated to the Pentagon by Congress. But take a look at this. This is the pie chart showing you where our resources went for fiscal year 2024. So the Department of Education received $229 billion. That sounds like a lot of money, but it's $229 billion of the $9.7 trillion allocated to federal agencies in 2024. Now, Senate confirmation hearings for Trump's education secretary pick, Linda McMahon, hasn't been scheduled yet. Her financial disclosures and other paperwork still need to be cleared by the Office of Government Ethics. But this effort to close the education department puts her in a pretty rough spot once those confirmation hearings happen. Common sense tells me they won't attempt to close the education department until the secretary is confirmed, said another person familiar with the discussions who was granted anonymity to address sensitive information. And look, it is worth noting that there could be a silver lining here involving, I can't believe I'm saying it, congressional Republicans, because some of them are already side-eyeing these plans, and they're not necessarily in favor of shutting down the education department. And doing so, by the way, is not as easy as signing an executive order. It's much more complex. Here's why.
I don't think we need the Department of Education. I'd be fine if it didn't exist, but I can also count to 60. And to dismantle a federal department, you need an act of Congress.
One of the Republican Party's platforms in 2024 is to rein in wasteful federal spending, but abolishing a federal agency doesn't automatically turn off the spending tap.
All the money the Department of Education has really is the money that's authorized by Congress. All of these programs will continue to exist and get money unless Congress voted to stop funding them. The debate about the future of the department is symbolic. What really matters is what we decide to do about the staffing and funding of these assorted programs.
And it looks like congressional approval might stand in the way of Trump getting what he wants here. Some conservatives concede they currently lack enough support for legislation to close the department and farm its core functions out to other federal agencies. But we have to wait and see what happens. I mean, there could be a tremendous amount of pressure on these Republicans in Congress to do what Donald Trump wants. Again, we have to wait and see. But one thing that I want to just clarify for everyone, I think there's a huge misconception about what the bulk of the education department actually does, like what they focus on. When it comes to the bulk of funding that public schools receive, that actually comes from property taxes that are paid on a local level. The education department does do some work as it pertains to public schools, but most of their focus, especially when it comes to financial, elements of the department, is for college students. So they provide financial relief, the loans, those types of things to college students. There are other things that the agency does as well, which I can get into in just a moment. But before I do, what are your thoughts, Cenk?
Yeah, so this one is another one that I'm not sure about, and I'm super curious to see what's going to happen. I'm gonna tell you my opinion about it in a second, but I'm curious what you guys think too. Like and this question really tests your optimism, pessimism, etc. to some degree. So whenever we're live, which is Monday through Friday, 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern, we do polls on the topics that we're talking about. It's in the chat. It's also at tyt.com for this one, and the community as well. Will the Republicans succeed in eliminating the education department? Right now, I'm at I don't know. I think I got it at about 50-50. So number one, do I think they should? No, I oppose it. Right, that's easy for me. I think education is monumentally important. Education saved my family's life. My dad was a very poor farmer in southeastern Turkey, got a free college education in the 1960s in Turkey, became a mechanical engineer, and we got to live the American dream ultimately because of that. And so you're not gonna find anyone more in favor of education than I am. So now, that doesn't mean that everything that the education department spends money on is wise. And remember that, I actually want to tell you a quick divergent story here, but it's going to relate. So part of the reason why the teachers unions all backed Hillary Clinton instead of Bernie Sanders in 2016, even though Bernie Sanders was so much more in favor of unions and the teachers unions, was because they were so worried that Hillary Clinton would go towards private education if they didn't back her immediately, and she felt crossed by them because that's what Barack Obama did.
Oh my God.
They didn't come into his camp early enough, so he punished them by emphasizing private education. And so they were worried, oh my God, we're gonna go more corporate, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the Democratic Party, let's be honest about it. So if you said to me, hey, I could find one or two things in the education department that doesn't make sense, funds private education, et cetera, great. I would believe it and I would be against it. If you say nuke the whole department, I'm totally against it. Now, as to why I'm unclear here, well, and the silver lining, and I know I'm sure somebody will take it out of context, but here we go. Let me explain it in context. So Republicans have been saying my whole life that they're going to get rid of the Department of Education and they're going to do massive cuts. And so they're going to save trillions of dollars. It's not just Musk and Trump that said it. Every Republican has been saying it for decades now, right? And they all pretend that there's trillions of dollars in waste, fraud, and abuse, et cetera, and that they're going to clear that out. And why? Because they always say, so we can give more tax cuts to the rich, right? So then Trump is saying the same thing. So now we're gonna have it out. Are they going to be able to kill the education department or are they not? And so part of that will be determined by Republican, and they're gonna need to filibuster-proof things with some Democrats.
That's true.
Right, so it's gonna be difficult, very, very difficult, okay? But a lot of it is going to be determined by the reaction of the American people. My guess is they'll say, no, brother, we asked you to keep prices down. We asked you to get us out of wars. We asked you to have a very tough policy at the border. So those are, you could consider that right-wing positions, moderate, whatever you want. But that was very, very clear. We didn't ask you to get rid of the Department of Education. So, or they'll say, yeah, no, we love it. We love the cuts. We did ask you to get rid of it. So I don't know the answer. And I'm intensely curious to see what's going to happen.
So I don't know the answer either. Obviously, we're just speculating and we're predicting what could happen. But what I do know is parents are upset with the public education system, even though the public education system is impacted more on a local level, right? So there are some standardized elements to our public education system coming from the top and the education department. But in reality, when it comes to funding decisions, that's actually far more localized than the Trump administration would have you believe. So part of the messaging that I have a huge issue with coming from Trump administration officials and Trump himself is they're making it appear as though the education department focuses all of its energy on public schools, but it doesn't. Now it does do some work with public schools. So for instance, again, public schools primarily, a state and local responsibility, but the Department of Education does serve more than 50 million students at 130,000 public and private schools. The department provides billions to aid students with disabilities and students in low-income communities, and the education department also provides financial aid for college students. So FAFSA, that's a federal thing. That's not a state or local thing, right? FAFSA is what you apply to if you need financial aid so you can actually go to college. So if you dismantle the education department, what government agency is going to handle college aid if a student wants to go to college? And by the way, I agree with conservatives when they argue college isn't for everyone and there should be more emphasis on trade schools for some students. I agree with you on that. So emphasize the trade schools, but also provide the opportunities for people who want to go to four-year institutions to be able to do so. If you dismantle the education department, you have to have some solid answers in regard to what is going to happen to all these different services that are provided to the American people from this department.
Yeah, and so I don't know that they're going to bother with answers. And look, we give Trump credit sometimes for doing the optics right? The Democrats never know how to make their own case. Joe Biden has been murmuring for 4 years straight. Chuck Schumer's been murmuring for about 20 years straight, etc. Right? They're like the world's worst messengers. And Trump puts on the outfits like he's like YMCA. He'll be a Native American soon with the whole, or Leatherman, I don't know. But he was a garbage truck driver. He was a McDonald's fries guy, etc. So now, when we give him credit for that, we say, not that we agree with him, but hey, on a messaging way of looking at it, that's effective. So what is the message that conservatives and Trump and MAGA are sending now? Whether you like it or not, or where you think it's fair that Americans are receiving this message or not, I'll tell you definitively the message that's being sent out. We're not in favor of education. Because if you were in favor of education, you would make a much more concerted effort to say, no, we love education. We want you guys to get an education. We want everybody to be, we want America to be strong and have the smartest, brightest, best educated citizens in the world. But we think the Department of Education is not helping with that. It's counterproductive, blah, blah, blah. But here's what we're gonna do instead. Right? And we're gonna make education better. I've heard none of that.
No, there's none of that. And that's what worries me, right? Because look, I'm not gonna sit here and pretend like we've got it all figured out when it comes to our education system. Our public education system is failing our students. There's no question about that. There's a huge portion of elementary school kids who should be able to read and they're unable to read. That is a huge problem. So when you have that issue and it's been festering for a long time in this country, and year after year we keep falling off in terms of the rankings, country rankings in education, Americans are gonna get increasingly angry and frustrated when there haven't been any solutions. And then when someone like Donald Trump comes along and he says, the education department is failing the American people, look at these test scores. Well, at that point, all of these Americans are pretty much primed to support the idea of dismantling that department. And so I am curious to see how this plays out. You are right, look, I think this is a perfect example of how our institutions work and how in some instances they hold, right? So the Senate filibuster, the legislative filibuster would make it incredibly difficult to find enough votes in the Senate to dismantle the education department. So I actually don't think at the end of the day it's gonna happen for sure. Like people act like it's already happened. But even if it's not dismantled, we do need to come to terms with the fact that education has failed the American people, our students, and there needs to be reforms and changes. And let's have that conversation.
Yes, and instead, look, maybe we will. Maybe it'll start a national conversation, and this is where we really need the Democrats to be effective. God help us. So then tell us why the education department is essential. Tell us what's so great about it. Emphasize the 2 or 3 parts that you love the most and you think are the most essential. Don't just go, them bad guys. That we already know, okay. Like, make an effective case. And if you're Republicans, I get that you want to do cost cutting, but have you even made a case for making education better? Because I haven't seen it. So whether you like it or not, the message you're sending out is, we don't want any stinking education. And by the way, then you've got to ask yourself, why doesn't your side want the American people to be educated? Thanks for watching the Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.